Hey, sad boy. What's up? It's the Culture Detective here, investigating your favorite albums, and today I'm going to proudly and excitedly say uh, that I'm going to start a Swans album review series, except I realized that I won't be able to cover all Swans albums, so I'm only going to cover, I guess, their three most recent albums, which are the double album trilogy. And I'm going to start off with Swans, this year. Let's go. So, Swans is a noise punk experimental rock no wave band from New York, fronted by Mr. Michael Girard, and they have been making music since the early 80s with albums like Filth, Cop, Greed, and Holy Money. And their earlier stuff is very noisy, very abrasive, and very much experimental. Nothing melodic of sorts. But slowly but surely, their music becomes more and more weird, abstract, strange, and of course melodic. And we have albums like The Great Annihilator, which I think is a pretty good album, but I think, in my opinion, Swans' discography really peaked in the year 1986, I think, with the album Soundtracks for the Blind, which is this really huge album with many different sound snippets, samples, sound collages, found sounds, and also these giant rock tracks, which are really experimental but also really beautiful. Helpless Child is easily my favorite Swans song ever. Then we have a 14-year hiatus where they return in the year, I think, 2011 with the album My Father Will Guide Me Up a Rope to the Sky, which is a bit of a lackluster return. It's playing a bit safe, and even though we have tracks like No Words, No Thoughts, and Jim, the rest of the album still feels kind of underwhelming. And then we have This Year. And honestly, I am incredibly happy with This Year. I think it is a very ambitious return to form, but also it is very clear that they have improved on their sound, and they are making some of the most strange, deranged, but also fascinating, interesting, and above all, most sonically challenging music of the world, basically. Their music is very dark, noisy, nasty, filthy, gruesome, gross, grotesque, and ugly. And on this album, even more melodic, but also even more frightening and powerful. Also very strange, and the instrumentals are very layered, very drony, and of course, when you have Swans, you have the very mind-numbing repetitions where they strum out a single chord with a strike of drums over and over and over again until easy listeners, shallow listeners, just turn off the music and walk away. But music listeners that are more invested in the experience and Swans fans are gonna remain after the torture that is this album. Oh my gosh. And the lyrics, I actually really like them. Most of the lyrics on this album are disturbing, abstract, weird, and also very primal. If you have paid attention to Swans song titles and album titles and all that, you know that their lyrics and their song titles and their lyricisms is based off of a very primal source. You know, eyes, skin, bones, blood, fire, snake in my throat and worms in my eyes as I scream at the sky, beating my chest, saying time is a flat circle. Welcome to Swans. The album starts off with the track Lunacy, which is an amazing album opener in my opinion. It's like slowly transitioning into this world of strangeness, of freaky entities that are evil and sinister, but also are beautiful and fascinating and wondrous. In the beginning, we get these bright, sinister, shrill guitars, which are paired very slowly with these pummeling drums and these loud, drony guitar blasts, and together they form this very theatrical atmosphere. And then slowly but surely we get these vocal harmonies, which are kinda scary, almost give off a tribal vibe, but mostly scary, as they keep on chanting lunacy, lunacy over and over and over again. And it also builds up into a very disturbing and loud climax, and then it suddenly breaks down into these very sorrowful, dejected guitars, which are very watery, very smooth, and we get these very broken and very corrupted vocal harmonies, which sort of tries to it's hard to describe these vocals, but they sound like your subconsciousness when your subconsciousness is evil and sinister to you. It's like these voices, they want to strangle you to death, but in a very soft and tender way, in a way they want you to understand why you have to die. But anyway, we have this chant, which is very memorable to me, and it is, "Your childhood is over," meaning that the age of innocence, the age of ignorance, it's over, and now you actually see and hear some shit that's gonna forever traumatize your life. And then we have the second track, "Mother of the World," which has some repetitions. We get these sharp, grotesque, stuttery grooves, which keeps on going and going and going for, I think, 5 minutes or so. It's very, very repetitious, and again, shallow listeners will probably turn away. But as it builds, an atmosphere forms around it, it becomes weirder, more deranged, freakier, more eccentric, and then it climaxes, and it's very ugly, very nasty, and then again, similar to Lunacy, it has an outro, it breaks down, and we get these very, very beautifully dark and chilling, cold, watery guitars, which just runs like water. It's very smooth. It's like a broken, old, sorrowful soul strolling in the streets of a city that's used to be very bustly, hustly, used to be very happy, but now everything's just broken and destroyed, and now you're alone, and you're walking on the streets like it's just another day on Earth. Also, Swans do this a lot, but before the track really ends, it sort of pauses a little bit, gives us a little bit of silence until it reaches its most final, ultimate ending, and it's just sonically very fantastic. And then we have the track "The Wolf," which isn't one of the best tracks in the album, because to me it sort of reads like an interlude, but basically it is 1 minute and 35 seconds long of bare bones vocals and very low-key guitars. And we also get the ending, which gets more and more windy and more drony, but the whole track overall is this almost a cappella acoustic folk balladry. Yeah. Afterwards, we have the title track, "The Seer," and it is 32 minutes long. It is a giant monster. It is a titan. And it starts off with these noisy, drony reeds, which are very frightening because they give off this really shrill skin and bones sound, which sounds like some sort of twisted ritual is about to take place. But after the reeds, we get these very quiet guitars and marchy drums, just very slowly and quietly working and bustling in the back. And then it gets louder and louder and more layered and more dense, and it builds up to a very dirty, filthy, grotesque climax, which is amazing. We even have Michael Gira on top just repeating the line over and over again as the Seer, I see it all, I see it all, I see it all, I see it all, I see it all. It's kind of disturbing, but also really fun to listen to. Like something is about to creep up underneath this layer of music and grab you by the ears and tear it apart. Very entertaining indeed. But yeah, of course, we get the noisy climax and the very constant strikes of guitars and drums that are just very loud and ear-shattering and crushing. And each strike, it gets repetitive, yes, but each strike is almost different. Each clash of instrumentals feels a little different, maybe a little more intense, a little weirder, incorporating a different instrument of some sorts. It's all very brilliant. And then towards the end, we get these very twisted, sinister harmonicas, which then slowly transitions into the outro, where it's incredibly dusty, deserty, very sneaky, freaky, snaky, and we get this bass line, which is very creepy. We get a very creepy bass line, which sounds like a snake slowly withering, and we get Michael Gira on top. Then we have the track "The Seer Returns," and it's actually a pretty catchy track. It's one of the first few tracks on this album that really hooked me in. But basically, this track is incredibly sinister, intoxicating, and we also get these drum rhythms, which are actually very constant, thus pretty catchy. And we also have Michael on top, just whispering spoken word, and we also get these backup vocals, which are very intoxicating, and it makes the atmosphere even more dense, even more sinister and evil, and I love it. And the lyrics, they are also very good. White light pours into your mouth, white light pours into my mouth. The whole thing, it's like I'm reading into a very old, like a very, very old biblical parable that doesn't make any sense because it's not meant to make any sense. It's like it's trying to be symbolic, but it tries not to believe that it is symbolic, and it's very primal, light, mouth. Afterwards, we have the track 93 Avenue Blues, and it's 5 minutes long of hellish, disturbing instrumentals with its wailing strings and its incredibly dense, sharp, and ugly instrumentations, just getting more and more dense and more thick as the song moves on. It's incredibly frightening and very, very disturbing until the very end, where all the instruments just scream as they get tortured. It's absolute sonic torture. But then afterwards, we get a song that's almost night and day, as opposed to the previous track, where we get the track "The Daughter Brings the Water," which is this very low-key folk song, like the calm after the storm, with its dejected guitars, which sound like it's extracted from the second half of a full set of chord progression. And we also get some melodicness, some melodicity, some melodies. And it almost reminds me of some of the more melodic tracks off of Swans' latter half of discography. We also get these really weird mic taps, which I don't know if they are mic taps, but there are some really intimate rhythms going on which just cover our entire ears. And this song also gives off this really serene but also surreal atmosphere, which I really appreciate. And then that's disc 1. Did I mention that this album is a double album? I think I didn't mention, but anyway, into the second disc. It also starts off with a pretty slow, quiet folk song with a Song for a Warrior, which is a folk song completely sung by Karen O, with some backup vocals by Michael Gira. But anyway, we get these straightforward but also somewhat dusty chord progression as we get a very thin layer of angelic, heavenly instrumental sort of wrapping around her vocals, and it's pretty nice. Even though the track isn't all that eventful or ugly or theatrical or dramatic, I still think it's kind of nice. Anyway, we have the last three tracks, which are three monstrous tracks. We have the track Avatar, which is a rager, but not in a way. It's very loud and nasty, but it sounds like how does it sound like? It sounds like a martyr going on a religious mission and is about to sacrifice himself so that he can save all the people who believes in the same religion. It sounds like another chapter on the book of insanity, and in a way it's not the final chapter, it's a transitional chapter, but it's still a very significant chapter. The whole song sounds like a horse running in a very urgent and intense fashion, and we get these bells for the entire duration of the track. These bells, which makes the track feel religious because they sound like church bells. And this track just gets louder and louder and louder, more and more intense. It just escalates to this very crazy climax, and in the middle of the track, it changes its tone from somewhat evil to very righteous and triumphant. And then at the end, it pauses, and then suddenly we get these rapidly spammed pianos, which then leads to this really wild and empowering and visceral ending where we get these soaring bass riffs which just crushes your ears. It's incredibly powerful. If there's one problem with the track is the lyrics. They are kinda basic, but still I think instrumentally this track is one of the most unique moments on the album, which I think if you're not a Swans fan, you should definitely listen to this track. It's definitely gonna turn you on. I mean, it's crazy. And then we have the last two tracks, which are both 20 minutes long. Actually, the former is 19 minutes and the latter is 23 minutes, but both of them are monsters. We're gonna start off with the former, A Piece of the Sky, which is one of the most beautiful things I've heard. Okay, period. This song is incredibly beautiful, and like a long time ago, Lunacy is my favorite track off of this record, but now it's this one. It's A Piece of the Sky. In the beginning, we get these flames, these fiery flames, which I don't know if this fire means anything. It's me when my bones are being cremated to ashes, because what comes afterwards is basically my soul ascending to another dimension, like heaven. The whole experience of this track feels divine, feels holy, feels powerful, not in a violent way, but in a way it's emotional and soulful, and spiritual, definitely spiritual. We get these very angelic but also drony vocals. I think they are vocals where they go and we get so many of these vocals which layers on top so densely, so thickly, it becomes drony. And then we are introduced with these dissonant strings, which just makes the whole track even more disorienting and weird. And at around the 7-minute mark, we are introduced with these very beautiful, blossomy, stringy, prickly strings, which just exists and pops and flickers for a solid 2.5 minutes until the 9:36-minute mark, where this bass line is introduced, and wow, it is gorgeous. It is magical. It's so beautiful, it's so heavenly, and it fits so perfectly after 9 minutes of ascending to heaven. This is the final part of the journey that is life. It feels like I am finally reaching the last few moments of the ascension to another dimension, and it's incredibly beautiful. It's incredibly amazing. And what's also really amazing is that the chord progression of these bass lines, it's endless. Usually a chord progression features 4 chords and it resolves itself and starts over again. But for the chord progression on this section, it's endless. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's amazing. And then at the very, very, very end, it just breaks down into this very beautiful, relaxing ballad that feels like life has finally ended and our soul, our spirit can finally rest in peace, like ultimate peace. And it's very romantic, actually. And it's one of the moments on the album where it's not nasty, it's not ugly, it's not nauseating, but instead it's very clear, like clear skies, staring at the sunset, enjoying life, and moving on. And it's theatrical, it's cinematic. That's what it is. The album ends off with Apostate, which is 23 minutes long, and it is your Swansisms, where it's very filthy, very ugly, very nasty. We get these I think bells, these sharp shrill instrumentals which are very shaky and windy. We get these strings and guitars which are really drony and nauseating, and they are pretty quiet at first, but again it builds up to a very noisy climax. And then before the climax, we even get these drum guitar strikes, which sounds like some sort of error happened. Just when you think this album is going to end off very beautifully, very smoothly, you're wrong. It's going to end off in a very nasty way. And at the 13-minute mark, we get these grooves, which are very sinister, very wild, and very demented. And very, very intense, very urgent. We also get some of the most deranged performances on this album on that particular section, and it just gets very climactic, very ugly. And then afterwards, it just doesn't end there. We even get a section of just wild, deranged strings just going ham. And then afterwards, it doesn't end yet. We still get these drums, which are just pummeling very, very loudly, very dryly, very violently, just clashing at your face, destroying your eardrums. And then the album just drops dead and ends. And it's a very crazy ending. Yeah, overall, I really appreciate this album. It's very ambitious, very cinematic. It has its beautiful, gorgeous, surreal moments, but mostly grotesque, messed up, disturbing moments, which are very loud, noisy, nasty, and ugly, and I just love it. This is the Swans experience that I signed up for. So yeah, my favorite track here is A Piece of the Sky, and my least favorite is The Wolf. I am giving Swans, the Seer, a strong 8 to a light 9 out of 10. So, have you listened to the Seer from 1 to 10? How much is rated? Like if you like it, hate if you hate it, and subscribe if you want more. And thanks for watching. Also, I will be reviewing Angel Olsen, Danny Brown, The High Woman, Tropical Fuckstorm, Hobo Johnson, and a bunch of other albums up next. Goodbye, and say cheese.